Welcome back to a new section of learning web development with DomainStack. Now, in the previous section, we covered a lot of ground. We surrounded CRUD operations, template and controller reuse, child routes, and even more complex controls via Angular Bootstrap. Now, this is the fourth of an 8-section series, and over the next 4 videos, we will be covering how to build out the rest of the dashboard. A lot of cool things are to come, including an introduction to D3. This is not going to be comprehensive, as that would require an entire course to its own. We will also build a couple more lists of data to show some different types of information surrounding customers and sales. In the first video of this section, we're going to be covering in more detail what it means to seed mock data. We will be diving into the chance library, why it's important in this process, and just why we augment it just a little with some of our own methods. We didn't cover this earlier because we had been building this application from the ground up, and I wanted to cover this later as we got closer to turning on the full stack. Now, without further ado, let's get going. Now, I'm going to be honest, it wasn't that long ago that I found this library, and it may be one of the most useful tools I've ever used. See, constructing mock data for the purposes of testing viability and performance is very difficult. What makes it so difficult? Different data types alone make it painful because of the sheer number of support functions that it requires. However, there are also domain-level types. Take, for example, a person or business name. Technically, they are an abstraction of just generating a string, but it needs to be done with specific domain constraints. It's not a single string, nor a paragraph, but rather a specific constrained string value. There is a lot to take in with Chance. You can see that by scrolling through its API down the left-hand side alone. We're going to use just a few of them: integer, name, address, city, state, zip, capitalize, and floating. There is so much to cover, but that's all we can get to. Alright, digging in. Let's first start with the loops that build the data because their logic differs from our use of chance. If we consider what we want to do, it will help explain what we're doing. We want to build a database of customers, let's say a maximum of 200, but at least 100. Each of those customers need to have their own sales, and the number of those sales should differ some, if not only to ensure that the generation of mock data is right manually. So let's say we want as many as 30 sales per customer, but no less than 10. Now each of those sales has items that define how much the sale was as far as revenue specifically. Let's say we want each sale to have at least one item, but no more than 5. With this business logic in place, we can understand the algorithm. The outer loop here is going to ensure we get the right range of customers. Notice, to make that range dynamic, we are leveraging the integer method of the chance library. Next, you see an inner loop for each customer for their sales. It too is leveraging the integer method to ensure we get at least 10 sales per customer, but not more than 30. Finally, inside that loop is the one ensuring that the customer's sale gets at least one item, but no more than 5. Now, backing out for a minute, we can see our first usage of chance to build data. The first line inside the customer loop builds a real mock customer object. The new customer function is actually ours, and we'll visit it momentarily, but right now let's focus on the chance calls. This is where those domain functions come into play. The name function, for example, generates a 2-part string where each has its first letter capitalized. You can even send in options to identify whether or not the middle name should be generated, or just a middle initial, or you can even ask for a prefix or a suffix. Another cool one is address. This is going to generate a real address-like string with the unit number and everything. You can even indicate that you want a suffix appended like avenue. Now, moving on, let's dig into the next bit of chance that really makes a difference for this data set at least. Inside the innermost loop, you'll see our usage of floating. This is how we generate a real currency-based price for each item. We can even identify how many decimal places we want. This is a huge benefit here. Now, let's break down some of our custom methods that we leverage. The first one I want to look at is new customer. As you can see, this wraps up the build customer and add one methods. The build customer doesn't do much but put the injected data into the right object structure. The add one is where I really want to get. Look at the add one method. We see that it simulates an identifier field and then adds it to the data store, an array in this case. That's why we augment the chance library just a little. It needs to meet the needs of our backend list development scheme. With all this background on chance, we can now change how much mock data we build depending on what we need to test. We could build as few as 10 customers if we wanted, or as many as 1 million. This really gives you a jump start on making sure your application performs well, regardless of the real data stored behind it. Now that we know how to seed our mock data, in our next video we are going to be discussing how to build a D3 graph for our dashboard.